Welcome to another edition of Shorty on the Fly. In the previous video, we discussed using some alternative materials for tying dry flies, especially if you find yourself on a somewhat limited budget. Since that video's release, I have had requests to demonstrate the actual techniques utilized for working with those materials, so let's get right to it. I'm going to tie an Isonychia pattern in order to demonstrate this technique because it is a relatively large fly that will be easy to see and because they are around at this time of year. For a hook, I will be using a standard dry fly hook in size 12. I always pinch the barb on the hook as it makes for easier removal from both fish and fishermen. For thread, I will be using Olive 6/0 Danville. After getting the hook secured in the vise, start your thread on the hook in the usual fashion, leaving about a hook eye space at the front of the hook and wrap it toward the rear of the hook using touching turns and taking care to build a nice smooth base on which to place the remaining materials. Stop when you reach the hook bend. Select about 8 to 10 moose body hairs and snip them free from the hide. While holding on to the tips, clean out any underfur that you may find. If the hairs are unusually long, you can clip away about 1/4 inch of the butt ends, as this will facilitate better stacking. Now drop the hairs into a stacker tips first and give it a few good taps in order to even everything up. By orienting the stacker so that it faces the same direction in which the material will be tied in, you can avoid that awkward change of direction for the hairs. Remove the hairs by the tips while keeping everything aligned. Now measure the hairs to form a tail about a hook shank in length. Transfer that measurement back to where the thread is hanging. Place the clump at a 45-degree angle to the hook and take one loose collecting wrap to gather the hairs, then make the second wrap using thread torque to carry the clump to the top of the hook. On the succeeding wraps, keep the pressure on the light side until you have made 4 or 5 wraps. Then increase the pressure as you wrap forward. This will keep the hairs from flaring too much. When you have reached a point about 70% up the hook shank, reach in and snip the hair close, then return the thread to the tie-in point. Now reach for your favorite ISO dubbing. There are many to choose from, but since I mentioned superfine in the previous video, that is what I will use today. In this case, the color is rusty brown. Apply the dubbing to the thread in ever so sparse wraps. You are really just trying to change the color of the thread. If you are a beginner, pull out what you think you need, reduce it by half, and now you only have twice as much as you really need in your hand. After creating a dubbing noodle about 3 inches in length, begin taking wraps forward, creating a slight taper as you go up to the 70% point on the hook. Now you are going to cut a clump of deer hair. In this case, I am using natural comparadun hair as it is my favorite deer hair to work with, but any deer hair will work. Selecting the right amount is something you just have to figure out yourself. There is no formula for this, but I will say, as is the case with dubbing, you usually need less than you think. After selecting an appropriate amount of hair and clipping it from the hide, while holding onto the clump by the tips, clean out as much underfur as you can. Now drop it into a stacker, give it a few good wraps to even up the tips, and remove it for tie-in. The next step may be a little different from what you have seen in the past, so watch carefully. While holding the hairs in a tight pinch with your left hand, take one loose wrap, another loose wrap, and now a firm wrap and pull the thread toward you. Take 2 or 3 wraps through the hairs to begin to bind them to the hook. You can now let go of the hair with your left hand, as you have it in a pretty good place. At this point, that wing may still want to spin around the hook, so here is my solution to that. Reach for the super glue and apply some to about 3/4 of an inch of the thread. Grab the wing again with the thumb and forefinger of your left hand, and while taking forward wraps, pull the fibers back in small increments. Those wraps with the super glue adhere not only to each other as they wrap, but also to the hairs themselves, and this will help keep that fussy hair in place. This works for caddis patterns as well. Once you have worked your way to the front of the hook, lift all of the hairs above the hook, snip them off as close as you can, and take wraps to smooth things out. If there are any uncooperative hairs left, just grab them and snip them off. It is not uncommon for this to happen. This is what scissors are for. Now take some thread wraps over the snipped hairs to tidy things up a bit. At this point, you are pretty much finished, and you could probably fish the fly just like this. But we want the fly to look nice and neat, so grab that dubbing again. Apply about 1.5 inches to the thread, wrap forward to just behind the eye. Whip finish, snip the thread, and you are done. Before removing the fly from the vise, check to make sure that everything is the way you want it, and trim away any uncooperative materials until it suits you. This pattern can be adapted to just about any mayfly that you can encounter. Just alter the size of the hook, the color of the dubbing, and the amount of hair to suit your needs. This is pretty much standard procedure for any pattern you wish to tie. I have also used a similar technique using snowshoe rabbit foot, but that will be the subject of our next video. If you found this video helpful or intriguing, like it and subscribe to my channel. There will be more. I bid you peace.